Yes, good afternoon. Thanks everyone for joining SAE Government Technologies on our LinkedIn Live event. I am the Technology Transfer Program Manager with SAE Government Technologies as it relates to our Defense Automotive Technologies Consortium and the OTA contract we have with the U.S. Army Development Command Ground Vehicle Systems Center in Warren, Michigan. As part of our DATSI consortium, we have an activity called Affinity Groups. It's where we work with government stakeholders, industry consortium members, as well as academic institutions to facilitate collaboration in very specific technology focus areas like cybersecurity. And we thought we would talk a little bit about some of the successes we've had with consortia and the government customer. And so let's get started. I have a very special guest with us today. His name is Ian Ferguson. He's Vice President of Marketing for Lynx Software Technologies, I think for just over 3 years now. But Ian brings a tremendous amount of experience. He's consulted in artificial intelligence and machine learning, and he was with ARM for 11 years, where they worked in advanced computing for automotive and consumer products. And he's got a very strong technical background with over 36 years of experience. So I'd like to welcome Ian to the LinkedIn Live event.
Hi. I guess
How you doing, Ian?
from that background, that must just mean I'm very old. 36 years in the industry. Oh my goodness.
Yes, but fantastic. See, you've got an older person next to you with no hair, so it's all good. Don't worry about it.
You're very kind. Thanks for the welcome.
Absolutely. So let me just take a minute to basically define what an affinity group is for the audience. So again, affinity group is a very focused conversation, but at a high level and a very unique and focused technology area like cybersecurity or energy storage. I think the primary value for the government stakeholders is to constantly be apprised and aware of the unique capabilities of the consortium membership, both small, non-traditional defense contractors as well as large firms as well. And I think for the consortium members, it's really important to, on a regular basis, be apprised of all of the technical challenges that the government stakeholders are facing. We may not have a funded project, but at least having those touch points along the year will keep everybody informed about what our challenges are going forward in terms of tactical and combat vehicle modernization. We did post a case study online with respect to cybersecurity and the experiences there. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But before we do, Ian, you and I spoke briefly on Friday in preparation for this call, and I think you had a very unique perspective about the value of affinity groups. Maybe you could just expand a little bit on what I've said.
Yeah, and again, thanks for the introduction. We are in that sort of small company category, right? And I think from my time at Lynx and also from my time at ARM, my experience was that if we talk and we're just getting information back from the primes, we get the what's, and it'd be speeds and feeds of a particular set of capabilities. But for us, if we go further down the value chain and can actually engage with the US Army in this case, we get the whys, right? And so the reason why that's important is that I think it helps us build better products. And we get to the core of where the problem is, because there might actually be a better way of solving the problem. Things might come through a prime and get skewed in a way that's in favor of what they're already doing. And if we go further down and understanding really where the pain point is, what are the US Army trying to accomplish on whatever the thing may be at that time, I think we get a better way of understanding how we evolve our products directly as opposed to it being filtered.
Yeah, well said. I think that's a great addition to my comments. So thank you, Ian. A little bit further, sort of in a roundabout way, how it works is that, as a consortium management organization, we go to the government customer and we say, okay, what are your priorities for the next foreseeable future? What capabilities do you sort of have covered? Sorry, what needs do you sort of have covered with your own engineering teams? But then, where are the gaps? Where are the blind spots? Can you characterize for us? And we sort of help them distill those down into problem statements. And then we go out to our members and we say, okay, our collective customer has these challenges in this particular area, and we asked the consortium to come forward with, capability statements and white papers about maybe some new technology or unique capability set that they have, and then we present that information back with the government customer and stakeholders, and they sort of guide us. Hey, I'd like to see a little bit more about company ABC. Found their white paper to be very interesting, and so then we get on a call and we talk about those problem statements. We present those capabilities of those members. We've got some bad echoing going on. That's unfortunate.
Oh.
From Patrick Wildeman. Hi, Patrick. Thank you so much. Appreciate the feedback.
So yes, literal feedback, audio-wise. I'm maybe in an echoey room. I'll go in mute when I'm not talking.
Yeah. So is that any better, Patrick? Well, let's continue. Hopefully it's not too bad. We have some other folks that are not hearing echoing. So Patrick, apologize for the sound quality. Hey, Veronica, thank you. So let's go ahead. Ian, talk a little bit, I think, about your work in cybersecurity in general, and maybe, some experiences in aerospace and certainly defense might help provide some perspective.
Yeah, so this isn't about really too much about us. It really is about SAE, but there's a bit of a context background. So we've been around 30 odd years, really focused on safety, so keeping humans safe and secure in aircraft, helicopters, manned and uncrewed drones. So as you know, that software is about keeping applications separated, isolated from each other, guaranteeing real-time determinism for certain functions. And as we started to get into, more of our connected battlefield as we go forward, those properties of keeping elements isolated from each other is obviously really important. You're going to have maybe an application that blows up, but you've got to make sure that application doesn't that doesn't manifest into breaking up other systems. So a few years ago, we were looking at cybersecurity and how do we, position our technology and how do we improve our technology with a cybersecurity mindset. Because as I say, we've historically been in the safety area. And you think back to 3 years ago, COVID hits. Our regular engagement with customers and people is like, you walk into a conference room, have a lunch and learn over, brown bag lunch. Well, that's all gone, right? And that's one of the impacts for us was like, how do we now sort of start to go off and engage and get information back? And I think for our view on cybersecurity is where we were coming from is like, no system, you can't build the perfect system. You've actually got to plan for your system to be compromised and actually deal with that, right? So yes, you've got to build a big old brick wall, and yes, you've got to have that brick wall continue to grow over time. But we were seeing so many things around platforms that were getting hacked and no one realized, right? And so, my area of AI that I've been particularly passionate about is actually learning what normal behavior is like in a system, recognizing abnormal, and then dealing with abnormal, right? And there was, so many of these systems where, and that's important because if you are compromised, it's going to take a while typically for those hackers to recognize and find the keys or find data to monetize, whatever it might be. So you really come back to this sort of zero-day threat of early recognition of compromise. I go back to the Mirai attack and, 2016, there should have been no reason why digitally connected toasters and DVRs were going off and accessing, Spotify on the East Coast and CNN. That was abnormal behavior that should have been shut down. And so for us, as we engaged around the chat with the US Army, there was a lot of those sorts of rhetorics that I think if we'd just been waiting for an RFP to come back, it would have been, yeah, we need to like isolate workloads and make sure one thing doesn't, scale, just have knock-on effects into other VMs. Yeah. But that was one of the topics we really wanted to talk about was, let's plan for being compromised. Let's do early recognition of that. And let's understand normal, identify abnormal, and have a strategy to mitigate abnormal. So that was, for us as a small company, one of those areas where we wanted to have that engagement. That other than, as I say, if we'd waited for an RFP, I think some of those elements might have been in the miscellaneous category as opposed to in a more front of mind. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I want to drill down into that. So just to back up a second, I think what I'm hearing you say is that when it comes to cybersecurity, yes, you're going to build this brick wall and you want it to be impenetrable, but it's only a matter of time before it is penetrated, it is compromised, and you want to have the systems in place to detect that as soon as possible. And then beyond that, you want to have the protocol to be able to pivot and deal with that intrusion in a very effective way. Is that basically what you're saying?
Yeah, I think you need to at least plan to be hacked and compromised. I mean, there are obviously some incredible paths, and hopefully your system won't get compromised. But I think you have to, if we are to maintain our leadership as the US and its allies maintain its leadership, whether it's in the air, on the very much up in the space, or down on the ground below the surface of the water, we've got to plan to be compromised and yes, raise that bar, but also do the early recognition of compromise. Absolutely. I think back to, I wasn't quite old enough for this, but in the, I think the 50s in the UK, there was this big bank of money, and they built this massive sort of front door on the front of the safe, right? Massive, great steel bars, impenetrable, and people went in on a 3-day weekend, excavated around the back, and in they went, and they got their money, right? And so when you're building a system, whether it's a server, whether it's a connected vehicle, whether it's a system that's managing infrastructure in energy, people are going to look for the weakest link, right? And we've seen people go in through a goldfish tank in Reno, for goodness sake, to access banker records. Quite why you'd have your goldfish tank connected to bank records. Stupid, yes, but people look for that. They've gone in through HVAC systems into data centers. Build that wall, but also have an awareness of looking for abnormal behavior and then deal with it.
Great. So goldfish are not very good at preventing penetration. Okay,
they're great for 4 seconds, right? And then they forget what they're doing. Sorry, bad joke.
All right. So I want to come back to something. You were talking about interacting with the Army, and in our case, I guess it's Ground Vehicle Systems Center in Warren, Michigan. So before I came to SAE, I was a member of the DATSI consortium. And so I know what it was like for me to engage with the consortium membership and team and collaborate, but also I knew that I had a responsibility to keep my fingertips on the pulse of what was going on at the customer so that I could understand their challenges, whether it's attend a Michigan Defense Expo or a GVSC in August, or just one-on-one with certain engineers at GVSC. Tell me a little bit about your engagement with GVSC, and maybe the challenges and successes in that engagement.
Yeah, I think from some of those early statements that Steve was saying, I'm sort of meant to sort of keep this fairly generic as opposed to going to specifics. But there was a statement of interest that came out from the US Army as they started to look at, like I was saying, more connected platforms, and a belief that they needed to adjust their software architectures to deal with this connected world where, maybe not everybody gets all of the information. You need to sort of like have different permissions levels. And obviously, the good news is it's connected. The bad news is it's connected, right? And so, our engagement there, we had a number of discussions where we were able to present our ideas to an audience. It wasn't just us. There was a series of people. One of the things that I think is great about this process is, more competition fuels innovation, right? And so, it wasn't just us going in with ideas. There were other companies that were presenting their ideas, and we obviously didn't see theirs. They didn't see ours. But I think if you take a step back, how is the US Army going to get best in breed capabilities? It's by seeing multiple people competing for their business, not, as you said earlier, not just the big guys, but also some of the smaller ones. So that was some of the initial engagements. I think it was key from us that, and I think especially as you look at the connected battlefield, no one company is going to be able to do everything. And so the other interesting dynamic here around these groups is we found people with complementary technology. So if I go back to my AI area, right, we're building a low-level hypervisor that can recognize normal, identify abnormal, and then how do you mitigate abnormal is something we say, well, actually, that's beyond our skill set, right? We're actually going to flag that up into a virtual machine, and somebody else can have the capabilities of recognizing, deciding what to do. Do we take it off the network? Do we bring the system back to a known good state? Whatever that would be. So the other dynamic for me with these groups was we started to find people with complementary technology where we could actually start to say, okay, US Army, I know we talked about this lower level, but think about, what we could do with this and some other third-party things that actually, one of the most overused words, solutions. I'm not going to use that word. Complementary technology that at least start to pull together more of the pieces of the puzzle than simply us in isolation.
Yeah, that's interesting. As I recall, as a member, one of the challenging things that I think other members experience is that at that moment when you identify at least a challenge or maybe even a project, navigating that teaming environment and trying to understand, how much transparency I need to have to identify those places where I can fit in the project or fit into the discussion inside the affinity group. Can you speak to that at all and how you navigated that?
Yes, I mean, I think our experience might be slightly different now and also 2 years ago. I'll explain why. So we're a small company, right? And 2 years ago we were privately owned. So our assessment was, okay, well, actually, we might as well go as open as makes sense because there's actually a lot for us to gain just from exposure into the ecosystem, exposure into the US Army, and it's not like I'm compromising existing business there or anything like that. As I said earlier, we've done a lot in avionics, and so ground vehicles at that point was quite a new area to us. So we looked at it, and I think any company would say, okay, where on this line, where do the cons start to outweigh the pros, right? And for us at that point as a private equity company, we're like, okay, well, actually, we're going to be very, very open, and I think our discussions with the third parties at that point reflected that. I think you'll see others where they've got existing business to protect. I think we'll increasingly see stages where you don't have friends and competitors. You're going to have co-opetition as people's, if you look at product portfolios from people, they've historically been, a pure hardware play, and then they start to say, well, actually, we're going to go into certification, or we're going to start to do some software layers. So, I think the landscape is changing a little bit. Our approach is, look, we're doing work with an end customer that's going to drive the technology, and it's going to help us guide what the business relationship's going to be. We're a small company, so we'd rather have some piece of that pie than zero. I always come at it from the first thing before you start slicing up a cake, you've actually got to go bake it, right? So before you start arguing whether you're going to have half of the pie or a quarter of the pie, somebody's got to build the cake, right? And I think the affinity group is an opportunity to do that. I have maybe a slight different opinion from some other people on this call, but I recognize that some of those more established players might have a a slightly different approach. But at least all I can talk to is for us as a small company, we went in it with be as open as we possibly can, and see where it led.
Thanks, Ian. Could you maybe just describe your direct experience with the affinity group process, and what do you think is working well? What are some of the challenges? I'd love to hear your feedback on what you think of the affinity group process.
Well, I think you touched on one element previously, where when we go into those groups, naturally some people are going to be quite guarded in the conversations, right? And I think when we were going into this one, we were trying to partner up, team up with certain people, and some of those teaming people that we were engaged were also sort of playing some other areas. So I think that's one of the fairly obvious ones where everyone's got to sort of set their line in the sand of how open they're going to be. As I said, we were very open, and I think that's probably the one thing that we all go in with it with eyes open, right? What's great for us is access to those groups. There's we're getting emails and awareness of what's going on in these areas of the Army, and yeah, you can find some of those proposals maybe being put out through other channels. But for us as a small company, doing that response process helps us refine our thinking first anyway. And secondly, we then get access into the core group. So, I think earlier, as a small company, early awareness sort of almost fulfilling a biz dev role for us, if you like. And then as long as we respond to a decent level that justifies a conversation with the stakeholders, then we get in there. So, we're largely positive, as I say. I think, there's a little bit of dancing, and it's like, oh, I'm on my first date with this person. I don't know whether, I'm only going to share a certain amount of the iceberg that's above the surface as opposed to going full open. We get through those, but at the end of the day, there's a program and that we know is funded to some level that will go off and engage. And I think as long as there's that helps normally pull together the third parties to find a way of working together. And also carving out, we'll have a carve out and say, actually, in this discussion, we're going to say this block is non-negotiable. It's us. And you're going to say this block, we're not going to talk about that because we're doing other things. But you find a way of working based on that end RFP or, inquiry for information.
Interesting. Yeah, thanks for that. My predecessor, David Pareca, who was the executive director of DATSI in the past, he was a person that launched the affinity group activity. He's refined it over a number of years, and I took it over in June of last year. And at least from my perspective, both consortium members as well as government stakeholders seem to be, happy with the process and how it works. And I think that the government, at least in my short tenure with affinity groups, they were very, very concerned about setting the expectation that there was a funded opportunity when it may or may not be the case. And so that's one thing that I try to do is convey to the consortium membership that, hey, look, we want to have a technical conversation in a very technology focused area, but we're not looking at a funded project right now. I think that's important to set that expectation level.
Yes, and I think I did use the word funded earlier. I think a better way of putting it is like there is a pain point around this area that the US Army is worried about, and I guess my philosophy there was it's going to manifest itself somewhere, right? So whether this initial thing lands onto a specific engagement that's monetizable, as you say, that's not a given. But for certainly as a small company to get the opportunity in court, if you like, to actually present ideas and maybe challenge some of the thinking that I think on the specific topic around cybersecurity, there was a particular mindset of how certain things should be done. Again, I'm not allowed to talk about the specifics, but there was a mindset that they had. And I think we were able to shape that a little bit in a slightly different way. Does that directly generate dollars? Not tangible, but my sense is, you take a step back. Connected battlefield, ground vehicles are going to be connected. Is somebody going to be needing to do something around cybersecurity? Yes, right. And I think whether it pops out through that one or comes out through a prime, where maybe some of those conversations have shaped what comes out through an RFP. That's what I'm excited about, right? I try to be controversial and try to generate questions, right? There's better there's better security software out there than McAfee, right? There's better AI hardware out there than Tesla, right? And so just fact. And Elon might drop off the WebEx now, but there is, right? And where it's coming from is a lot of it's coming from some of these smaller innovative companies, right? And so that's the excitement, is we get to sort of show the art of what's possible. I'm not going to claim that a number of other companies have used that phrase, but if you think of that in that framework of how does the US maintain its technology leadership in a number of categories? We're showing them what can be done, whether that's AI, whether that's 5G, whether it's quantum computing, whatever those things might be. I think this process opens that up, even though if there might not be a tangible path to revenue for the specific thing that comes up. And for us, we're willing to take that bet because we see the pros outweigh the cons.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to double click on something you said. You talked about shaping requirements. And I think, Ground Vehicle Systems Center has tremendous engineering personnel and assets, right? But, in a fast moving technology sector, do they have trouble keeping up? Absolutely. They're human. We all do. But when you involve a village and you collectively reach out to a group of individuals who each bring a certain perspective, I think collectively that's going to be a better result. And anytime you can tactfully give somebody, especially a government stakeholder, a different perspective on their challenge, to make sure that once it comes to industry, it's been well thought out, it's been challenged, then I think the requirements document, the project document, comes out in an improved way and is set up and positioned to be more successful in the prototype development because there was collaboration on the requirements end. There's also collaboration on the execution end, but if you can collaborate early on and really collaborate with the government to shape the requirements, I think that's a good result. So I wanted to put an exclamation point on that topic, Ian.
Yeah, well, thank you. And certainly, I won't mention specific names, but I talked earlier about how the sort of teaming work has gone on as a result of the work we did here. We found companies that we're partnering with today as a result of that into some slightly different areas. We also got some candidates for potential M&A that we've got out of these engagements. And I think just back onto the requirements, I think it's naive for me to think that out of the US Army it says thou shalt use Lynx technology. That's given vendor locking concerns and all that. I think that's a little naive. But what we're wanting to do is how do you solve problems, and how do you go after a connected platform with different levels of permissions, and if you get compromised, how do you sandbox that challenge, and then build the system back to a known good state so humans stay safe and secure, and you can accomplish the missions you want to do. Those are the things that I want to be coming back out on the requirements, right? As opposed to I have to use an HP laptop in this thing. I think that's naive. But yeah, shaping it without having a Lynx logo or whatever. That's really what we're trying to do.
Thanks, Ian. Well, I want to give the audience an opportunity to ask questions. I think we have about 28 minutes left for Q&A. And so at this time, I'll ask the audience as well as the LinkedIn Live facilitator to look for questions from the audience. The thing I'll add as we wait here is, like I said, yourself included, Ian, in Lynx Software, you've had a successful experience with affinity groups. You've spoke to some of the benefits and the value proposition of the process. We have two other groups. One is electrification, electrified systems, energy storage, those types of things, which support the hybridization, electrified efforts of certainly tactical vehicles and hopefully someday combat vehicles. Also modeling and simulation, working with Jeff Jaster and his team. We have done facilitated affinity groups with modeling and simulation. And a recent activity here, the fourth quarter of last year, I reached out to Mr. Jaster and we just decided to use one of his Industry Day slides that he presented at Automation Alley in September, which had two slides that had, here are our technology gaps. You know, here's the compass. This is what we're trying to accomplish in modeling and simulation. We've got a tremendous team, but we still have some blind spots. And I just took those two slides and circulated it across the consortium membership, and we had a handful of companies come back with very specific capabilities that address those blind spots. So that was pretty interesting. But we plan to expand the use of affinity groups across other technology focus areas to be in alignment with the technology focus areas of our OTA agreement with GVSC.
Maybe just pick out. I think, you know, back to your earlier point about it takes a village. I think that system modeling one is an absolute great example of it's going to take a village, right? So if you look at one of the main drivers, like how do I build these highly complicated platforms, you know, quicker, upgradable in the field, you know, cheaper. How do we get through some of the hiring challenges inside this industry, right? You know, we want to get new developers excited about this area. Those people probably aren't coming out of school with Fortran and Ada, right? So, you know, one of our activities has been looking at how we embrace languages like Rust to sort of bring in a new ecosystem. There's all this, you know, if I had $1 every day for my email that's lit up with DevSecOps, right, and SBOMs, you know, clearly there's a number of ways we as an industry in the US, we just have to bring out technology faster, but still, you know, maintain a level of security and safety there. That's not just going to be us. That's going to be primes plus, you know, probably an open ecosystem of tools that will plug together in a coordinated way. So, you know, people can use cloud infrastructure to do much faster iterations before you have hardware, right? And then how do you do that upgradability with making sure that if you're doing containers, how do you make sure that those containers are safe and secure and don't embed malware? So, you know, that simple, easy way of saying system modeling, but if you think of it in that big picture, that would have, you know, as I say, primes, you know, what I would sort of say is foundational software from people like us with hypervisors and RTOSes, but SBOMs and all sorts of other capabilities that you have to bring in. That just one thought of emphasizing your village comment. So
thanks, Ian. We do have a question. If a company wants to get involved with an affinity group, how do they find out more information? I think that our website landing spot has some information on affinity groups at a very high level. I'm always available to explain or to go over our affinity group process one-on-one with any consortium member. And I think just being a member, you're going to be part of a communication loop that will proactively identify when those affinity group sessions come on the calendar and what kind of topics they'll be covering. So I think just being a consortium member would give you access to information that would alert you as to upcoming affinity group sessions. So hopefully that answers the question.
So I had a question for you, Mark. Just if I can ask you, I want to put you on the spot. You said you're thinking of adding some other groups. What sort of things is going through your mind right now about other affinity groups over time that might make sense?
I certainly think lightweighting has a place for an affinity group. We have another program that's somewhat related to that, the Advanced Manufacturing Commercialization Center in Sterling Heights, which is also in collaboration with DEVCOM, U.S. Army, GVSC. But I think that could be a place. And then there's quite a bit of focus on autonomy, of course, right? With the robotic systems, I think robotics is another area that's going to require tremendous collaboration in order for it to be successful for the warfighter. They're making a lot of progress, but I think that's another opportunity. There's safety systems, so there could be all kinds of different aspects of safety and survivability that, we want our warfighters to be safer, right? So everything from devices inside these modernized vehicles to keep them safe.
Yeah.
Couple of ideas.
Yeah, thanks. I think just riffing on that a little bit, one of the things we've been wrestling with, and indeed the industry in the air is wrestling with, is how do you certify AI if your code base is changing, right? And the way AI calculates answers, if you don't have a tangible, solid proven way of how it came to that decision, how do you know you're safe? And so, I think the bit around, AI is going to happen, maybe a little quicker than Elon Musk. Back to my earlier comments, said I think we're all driving completely autonomous vehicles by now, according to Elon a few years ago. But the reality is this tech is hard, right? And it brings tremendous value. But I think you're going to have to sandbox some of those capabilities, because the impact of a decision that cannot be traced back, and a decision that ends up being wrong is just not something you're willing to sit with. So that whole piece around autonomy and where it fits with safety and certification, certainly in the air, is something that I think all of the regulators are wrestling with, and I'm sure there's going to be similar elements on the ground, just based on AI and how it calculates stuff with these neural nets.
Absolutely. It's a field that's moving at light speed, for sure. There's another question here. Will you talk about upcoming opportunities? We're not going to cover specific upcoming opportunities today. However, as a previous member of this consortium and others, I can speak a little bit about how I would mine for upcoming opportunities, as opposed to just waiting for the consortium to sort of inform me. Of course, DATSI has a cadence of newsletter and membership engagement and recruiting and communication flow back and forth. And quite honestly, we achieved a tremendous net promoter score from our consortium membership last year in 2022. So I think we're doing a lot of things the right way. But I think attending the advanced planning briefing to industry from the Army GVSC at Michigan Defense Expo coming up in April is a really good forum to engage, team, understand what kind of technical challenges the Army has in its modernization priorities. And then once you see that advanced planning to briefing, some of those opportunities, may or may not come through an OTA mechanism. But if they do, at least you have some advance warning, and you can start to lean forward, engage with the Army, understand through an affinity group or directly what their specific challenges are, and then collaborate with consortium membership to team when those opportunities do come out. Looking for other questions. I'm not sure. I think that may be it for now. We'll wait just a couple of minutes. As we wait for questions, Ian, do you have maybe some last comments you'd like to make?
I always have something to say. Hopefully people aren't just, hating my voice right now. I'm trying not to have spoken too much. I think just picking up on your newsletter item, it was one of the things that I found that useful is some of these new companies that get onto my radar screen as a result of the newsletters. So we'll sometimes see people that are announced as a new member or whatever, and start to see where they fit in that village. So I think that would be just one thing. Just pick up on your last comment. I think we covered it, but just to sort of again reemphasize it, I think we go into this with, not to believe that we aren't doing this as this is a guaranteed path to a pot of gold. This is, we broach and we engage in this partnership as part of, part of it is us improving our technology better for the reasons I described. Instead of getting the whats, I get the whys, more directly, further down the value chain. So we're going into it from that being a sort of a core motivation, and the ripple effect of, the awareness of, my small company into not just the Army, but also into this, ecosystem of partners. So, I have sort of like direct tangible revenue sort of down, at number 5. I did number 1 and number 2. There's nothing at 3 and 4, right? Just to show where it is. So I think as long as you walk in there with, as long as for your company, some companies might be, I need to get revenue and I need to do it in a guaranteed way by Tuesday. This might not be quite such a tangible way to do that. But I think as long as you're going into it with, as I say, my 1 and 2, and then something very low down being revenue, we found it worth the ROI. So that would be my parting comment.
No, thank you, Ian. Appreciate that. One last question here. Can you talk about who can participate in an affinity group? So really it's open to, like I said, the government stakeholders, but also the consortium members, whether they're an industry participant or they're an academic institution that talks about their R&D activities because they want to share some information. Those folks are all eligible to attend. And I want to come back to something you said earlier, Ian, and a lot of times I would be participating in a consortium event and I could hear some chatter about disappointment in terms of, not having access to opportunities. And I at that time I conveyed to them that, you really have to reach out and get the why, whether it's through an affinity group or directly with stakeholders on the government side, because they're very approachable. Even though I think a lot of non-traditional defense contractors are intimidated to reach out to the government, they, especially Ground Vehicle Systems Center, they try to make themselves approachable and available to industry to answer questions. And I think, joining the affinity group process, you're going to identify those people within the government side that you can reach out to after the fact to get the why. I can tell you that my engagement with the consortium was much more, the ROI was much greater if I had the why, if I had that input from the government and not just relied upon the teaming partner. It just seemed to be a better experience.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that lines up with ours. I think the other thing that we learned through the process was actually being able to try and talk in the language and with the cadence of the US Army. I think the first time one of our learnings was we went in there guns blazing on, tech this, tech that, and I think, in that particular discussion with the Army, they're like, oh, hang on, you need to be able to break this down into technology buckets and our processes that we understand. So there was almost like a little bit of chameleon, if you like, where we had to adapt how we were, what we would say normally to, a prime, where we are sort of immediately buried down into tech because we're fitting into a sort of a particular box, right? We're doing an RTOS, we're doing a hypervisor, whatever it might be. We're doing a certification project. With with this sort of more of a wide-ranging topic, I think first bit was like, okay, now we actually have to sort of put it more in, and I'm not saying there was technical naivety, but we had to sort of put it into, terminology and processes that the US Army understood. So, our first meeting, I think there was a bit of, that kind of work, but the other useful thing for us now is as we approach US Army, whether it's PO Aviation or other groups, I think we've got that sort of terminology, methodology set, I think a lot more down because of this work. So kind of another knock-on benefit of being involved in these affinity groups and then the subsequent discussion with the Army. Does that make sense?
It does. You gotta be cognizant of what kind of audience you have, for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, great. Ian, thank you so much. I know you're a very busy guy. Really appreciate the time.
Great.
I wish you could send some of your sunshine to us here in Michigan.
Well, we're in California, so we'll complain for the rest of the year about those few inches of rain we had a few weeks ago. But yeah, it's nice to have the sun out again.
Well, I look forward to seeing you in person again, Ian. Thanks again for your time.
See you in April.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks
now.
everyone for joining. And again, I greatly appreciate the opportunity for attending here. So thank you.
Bye now.